thrives in the Black Hills wilderness. There isn't even a road here. To realize his epic vision, he first needs giant infrastructure. A small city springs up at the bottom of the mountain, complete with new roads, blacksmith shops, and tool sheds. A steep 760-step staircase and a cable car take the workers to the top of the mountain, over 5,000 feet high. Winches lower the carvers down onto the faces, dangling hundreds of feet above the ground. Giant compressors pump air up the mountain to power the pneumatic drills and custom-made air hammers. Mount Rushmore is the first project of its kind in the United States. So the mountain carvers must adapt or invent all the tools and techniques they need from scratch.
It was a learning experience for them, an experiment in how do I hold these tools? How do I keep them in place as I'm suspended over the side of the mountain? How do I keep them in place as I'm suspended over the side of the mountain?
Workers move around the cliff face in a special harness called a bosun seat. It's used on sailing ships so sailors can safely reach the rigging.
Gutzon Borglum adapted and adjusted the bosun seat for use on the mountain. He had to invent tools. He had to make tools better. He was ingenious in all of those areas.
Hundreds of specialists are recruited and trained, from powdermen and blacksmiths to winchmen and callboys.
It was very noisy where the winches were running and they couldn't see the men over the side of the mountain. So Gutzon had a caller on the top who would see where the men had to go and let the winches know what they needed to do when they needed to do it. Amazingly, in the 14 years, they had 0 casualties.
Adapting American mining techniques allows workers to overcome the wild mountain range in South Dakota, to forever stamp the images of the great American leaders on the landscape, and surpass the achievements of the ancient world. But is there more to this modern American wonder than a tribute to past presidents? The 7 wonders of the ancient world are riddled with secrets. The largest of them all, the Great Pyramid of Giza, contains hidden passageways and concealed rooms. And Mount Rushmore is no different. Behind Abraham Lincoln's head lies a secret tunnel, extending 70 feet deep into the rock. But it hits a dead end. A 1,200-pound granite capstone seals an underground chamber at the tunnel's mouth. Inside, a titanium vault that contains a long teak casket. And carefully stacked inside, 16 super-thin enameled panels. Why are these mysterious tablets hidden inside Mount Rushmore? And why is there a tunnel that seems to lead nowhere? In Washington's Library of Congress, architectural historian Paula Reed hunts for an explanation. There are thousands of documents detailing Mount Rushmore's evolution, among the personal papers of its creator, Gutzon Borglum.
There's a lot of correspondence dealing with Congress to get funding. A lot of the funds were matched with private funds, so there was also going out and beating the bushes for private donors. So funding was a problem from the beginning.
The monument is initially budgeted at $250,000, but costs quickly soar to nearly $1 million.
They kept running out of money, and there would be an appropriation, and it would get spent, and then work would stop, and then there would be another appropriation.
And here we have records that were kept in 1939 and 1940.
Paula wants to understand why the project keeps running out of money, so she works with the collection's historian, Barbara Baer.
Gutzon Borglum did change his mind a good bit, and things evolved.
Gutzon Borglum's vision of Mount Rushmore expands over time. They're searching for evidence of his most audacious and expensive plan.
So these are oversized items.
Original blueprints reveal detailed designs for a complex around the Finnish monument.
Part of the proposal of Gutzon Borglum was to have this grand staircase that would allow visitors to climb all the way up behind the heads.
The staircase leads to the majestically titled Hall of Records. Borglum describes a chamber hidden within the mountain that explains Mount Rushmore's purpose and houses a depository of the country's most sacred texts.
I would have copies of important documents like the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and an explanation of who the heads were and why they were on that mountain.
But could the chamber hold more than just an explanation of the mountain carving? Gutzon Borglum reveals his master plan for the Hall of Records in his unpublished personal memoir.
It's an interesting thing that it's another argument about the larger plan.
And that's Borglum's handwriting, where he was editing himself.
Borglum plans a grand hall, 80 by 100 feet, drilled behind the faces, with an 800-foot-high granite stairway climbing up to it. At the chamber's grand entrance, a bronze eagle with wings spanning 38 feet sits above huge glass doors. Inside, bronze and glass cabinets fill the walls, showcasing national documents like the Declaration of Independence. Busts of famous Americans decorate the hall, and the nation's contributions to the world are inscribed on the walls. Gutzon Borglum wants to secure Mount Rushmore's place among history's greatest monuments, and America's legacy for any future civilization discovered.
Borglum was so attracted to these kind of ideas of colossal shrines like the pyramids. You see from the outside this very monumental structure. But if you go in the inside, there's this secret chamber that tells us the story of that time period.
The records show Borglum persuades Congress to grant $50,000 for the construction of the Hall of Records. In 1938, workers start blasting the cavity for the hall out of the mountain. But World War II forces a halt.
Congress said, we need this money for the war effort, so we're done here. Don't worry about the Hall of Records. Don't worry about the grand staircase. Just get the heads done.
The heads are swiftly completed, and work on the monument stops in October 1941.
The Hall of Records, which had been started, is still left there in its unfinished state.
There's still evidence of the moment that construction stops. Tool marks scar the sides of the passageway. In 1998, Gutzon Borglum's daughter buries 16 enameled tablets in the entrance to the chamber. This time capsule contains a history of the United States and biographies of the 4 presidents and Gutzon Borglum. Mount Rushmore was intended to be more than a tourist attraction. A high-tech repository to guard many of the national treasures that define the history and identity of the USA. Okay, I want to thank Moon and Path for sending me this. Now, there's a couple things other than the history you're going to learn here. The artist for this, Ted Ed Lessonsworth, serving Ted Ed. This is the channel that I'm on right now. These people, whoever did this, they've got 6-point-some million subscribers. Okay, these people know what I have been uncovering, what God has been showing me recently. These are not secrets. All this stuff is well known. It is just also well hidden.
and well covered up. Okay, like it's going to talk about when the natives, how they come out. You're going to see the drawing, these two massive legs, and the cave that they come out of the hole is pretty much a vagina coming out of the earth. And you see the two legs on the ground. You'll notice this a couple times when it shows Mount Rushmore towards the end. The illustration, it shows right to the left of Washington, you'll see a massive face that is made in of the rocks that was there previously before untouched. And I've always known that Mount Rushmore is some kind of massive giant. I've always known that. So after this video, I'm going to go ahead and Google Earth it. You see that? One man's shrine is another man's cemetery. Think about it.
Between 1927 and 1941, 400 workers blasted 450,000 tons of rock from a mountainside using chisels, jackhammers, and a lot of dynamite. Gradually, they carved out Mount Rushmore. Now, the monument draws nearly 3 million people to South Dakota's Black Hills every year. But its facade belies a dark history. About 10,000 years ago, Native American people began inhabiting the Black Hills. The area became especially sacred to the Lakota people, who formed the western branch of what the U.S. called the Sioux Nation.
See the legs?
The Lakota believed one...
Do you see it? The legs. It even has feet. And then what is that? A hole at the top of in between the two legs?
Within the Black Hills to be where they first emerged, and they named one of the Black Hills mountain peaks the Six Grandfathers, after their sacred directional spirits. But in the 1800s, Lakota access to this land came under threat. White settlers in North America expanded their territories by using physical violence or negotiating with indigenous peoples. After its establishment in the late 1700s, the U.S. government ratified hundreds of treaties with Native American nations. However, it often broke them or created them using coercion. Between 1866 and 1868, the Lakota and their allies successfully defended their land from the U.S. military and negotiated a new treaty with the government. In the 1868 treaty at Fort Laramie, all parties agreed that a vast territory, including the Black Hills, belonged to the Sioux Nation. In return, the Lakota would allow U.S. travelers to pass safely through. But many aspects of the treaty also aimed to assimilate the Lakota into white culture. This included incentives to convert them from hunting to farming, abandon their nomadic lifestyle, and wear clothes the U.S. provided. Meanwhile, just 7 years later, the U.S. broke the treaty after an expedition found gold in the Black Hills. Miners set up camps, the military attacked and ultimately defeated the Lakota, and the U.S. passed legislation illegally seizing the land. 50 years later, workers began etching into the Lakota's sacred Six Grandfathers Mountain. The project was led by an arrogant sculptor named Goodson Borglum, who had ties to the KKK. The historian originally proposed that Mount Rushmore include Western figures, like Lakota chief Red Cloud, but Borglum chose to feature his own heroes. By October of 1941, Borglum had died from surgical complications, and work stopped, though the project was unfinished. None of the four figures had torsos as intended, and rubble was left piled below. To the Lakota, the monument was a desecration, and the presidents immortalized on the rock face all had brutal anti-indigenous legacies. Members of the Iroquois Confederacy called George Washington Town Destroyer for encouraging military campaigns that burned 50 of their villages in 1770.
So these heads that have been put there are heads that have killed many people. Killed many people. Now I heard of a talk about Trump putting his head up on there. And you think, oh, well, Trump didn't kill anybody. Who did Trump kill? Operation. He's even called himself the Messiah. His mom's name is Mary. His dad or his grandfather's name is Christ. I believe, yeah, I think his grandfather's name, his first name is Christ. And then his like dad's name or something, his middle name is Christ. His mom's name is Mary. Come on now, people. This whole Antichrist thing, this whole Messiah thing that's going to show up in, which is a prophecy made up by people. That's going to show up in a suit. That's going to deceive many. Well, yeah, there you go. But also what it talks about is deceiving the very elect, which would be what's happening in the sky. A lot of people believe that it's this alien invasion. It's the same thing that's been happening throughout time. It's things coming from other dimensions, from other realms. Places we don't go, not allowed to go, where they're not allowed to go. But then again, it was also said that, all this is going to happen because they were put down below and they're going to come back up. I guess we'll see. But if you think about it, Trump's face, I guess, does belong on there. Biggest deceiver in the world.
Theodore Roosevelt championed forced assimilation and said, "I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of 10 are." In 1980, after the Sioux Nation had sued the U.S. for treaty violations, the Supreme Court ruled that the Black Hills had been unlawfully taken, and the Sioux were entitled to compensation. The amount named has since reached over $1 billion, but the Sioux Nation refused to take the money and give up their claim to the Black Hills, maintaining that they were never for sale. So, what should happen to Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills? Responses to that question are wide-ranging. Some, including tribal leaders and Borglum's great-granddaughter, have called for Mount Rushmore to be removed. Others see it as an important patriotic symbol and vital aspect of South Dakota's economy that should remain. Many Lakota people want the 1868 treaty to be honored and the now federally controlled lands to be returned to their tribal communities. Others have said that the Lakota and the U.S. should at least co-manage parts of the Black Hills. Currently, there are no plans for change. The U.S. broke many of its promises with indigenous nations, making issues like this common. Native people have been fighting for broken treaties to be honored for generations, achieving some major victories along the way. Meanwhile, if untouched, the faces engraved on the 6 Grandfathers Mountain are expected to remain for thousands of years to come.
See the chemtrails in the illustration too? That's all chemtrails right there. The world you live in is very fake, people. Wake up.